Again, welcome to Eika. The participants are mostly from Rotary Club of Pune, Riverside. Rotary Club Pune, Riverside is a club at Pune. I will little bit introduce you about the club. Our club has affiliation to Rotary International, which is headquartered in US, having a presence in over 200 countries with 15 lakh members, and it's a 117-year-old biggest NGO in the world. Our club has got about 43 members from diverse field, and we are deeply involved in community service, having large projects. Some of our recent large projects are construction of a dam at a village nearby at Pune, Gundalwadi. We have upliftment community service project for 8 number of villages in Vele Taluka. We are constructing a school nearby with a cost outlay of 1 crore of rupees. We are supporting many schools for upliftment of their infrastructure facilities and make them happy school. This is all what we do. Ipsita, you have got any announcement?
Not today.
Okay. We have Ritika Merchant's birthday tomorrow. So congratulations, Sanjay.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll take forward this meeting with our guest speaker. The conversation with Ganesh will be there for around 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have question answer session, and followed by vote of thanks, and maybe 4 lines from Vardhamanji if he is there.
He's there. Umesh, 12th October ka announcement.
We have the next fellowship meeting on 12th of October. The earlier date fixed was 18th of October, but Deepak is on some foreign tour, so we are preponing it. And on 4th of October, we have our regular meeting at Sheraton.
Umesh, can we discuss this later, because 11th we have another speaker and 12th fellowship may not be a good idea. I'll speak to you separately and we can figure out dates.
Yeah, the 11th speaker is coming from Bombay, so we can't change it.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll figure that out separately.
Okay. So let's go straightway to today's agenda. I would request Ganesh to introduce our speaker, and then the floor is yours, Ganesh.
Sure, thank you, Umeshji, and welcome, Eika. So, ladies and gentlemen, normally when Eika speaks, I'm speechless. So, but today we'll try and make a slight difference. I met her first at a industry event when she was a very powerful CEO and had everybody following her all over the room. So that's when I started wondering who is Eika. And after that, I've got to know her very well. She's come and spent time in Pune also. And as you probably know, I mean, she actually combines 3 worlds, which is very interesting because she combines the world of what we all have done, which is looking at wealth through various jobs and various CEO pursuits. She has actually worked in multinational banks, also in the Future Group, and so on and so forth. But interestingly, she's also a practitioner of meditation and yoga, very much like our Niruji and so many others. And she has learned across Kerala, Rishikesh, Banaras, many places. And what strikes me most is that she also is she looks very young, but she's actually very wise for her age and has learned a lot of mythology. And every time we speak to her, she will actually link up something she has learned from studying the mythology in 21st century work, because all of us are trying to find some crutches or some words of wisdom that will guide us through different times. And Eika is really very, very good at that. So I'll leave it to Eika. So Eika, please, first of all, tell us what your name means, which was the first thing I asked you. And after that, you can please talk to us about whatever you like. And, I mean, if there is anything in between, as she has already said, feel free to interrupt her. Or, of course, after about half an hour, we will hand it back to Umeshji for more questions. And over to you, Eika.
Thank you, Ganesh, and Namaskar. Thank you, Umesh. Thank you for having me here. Like I said, actually, I'm a person of. So it's interesting that Ganesh talks about my life in terms of all that I've done through banking, through being the CEO of one of India's largest skilling companies, and now what I do on my own. So I run this organization called Eikam, which is, as we say, the wisdom organization from India for the world. This is a journey, and like all of us here, हम लोग की जितनी स्कूलिंग और एजुकेशन और कॉलेज वगैरह था, बहुत ही मैकाउलियन कंस्ट्रक्ट वाला ICSE और standard college. And I remember that about 15 years ago, I was very conflicted. So I was working, multinational bank में नौकरी थी, successful, husband, बच्चे, good career, everything was going well. And I thought I should be very happy within. And I realized that I wasn't. Matlab, bahar se it was a very poster perfect life, but not so within. And I think that's where my quest started to figure out, ki yaar, this should have made me very happy. I should have been the happiest person on the planet. And then I used to see my husband, by the way, who's also a fellow batchmate from B school. And he was genuinely happy in whatever he was doing. And I used to get even more upset at that. Ki matlab, I should have been happy. I am not. I have met every tick mark I was supposed to have met. And here's a man who's actually very happy. So, kuch to problem hai, either in the way I've been raised. By that time, I think the only reconciliation I'd had was ki it can't be a me problem because I've done everything right as it should have been done. So clearly there's a problem or there's an issue somewhere in the way we've been raised, the narratives we've been raised, कि ये click नहीं हो रहा. So I think that is when my quest began. I'm Chaturvedi by birth and Banerjee by marriage. So between the two, I had access to enough books and scriptures and people of wisdom, which I'm very, very deeply grateful for. So I went back to them. I said, you need to explain this to me. I've done everything that was expected out of me. Padhai kari achhi, shadi kari achhi, naukri kari achhi, bacche bhi achhe hain, sab theek thaak hai. So you need to explain to me how's this life not working out. And that was really the start about 15 years ago. But and the reason I mentioned this is because, like Ganesh said, to me, that world became far more real than the world we've been raised on. And I realized, and that's when I went through about 10, 15 years ago, I re-educated myself. So I went back to mythology and scriptures. I actually certified myself on, so I am a certified comparative mythologist. I went back to neurosciences and psychology and sociology and anthropology. Just to figure out कि हमें समझना क्या है. What do we know about the human mind, the human behaviors, the social constructs, everything that we've been raised on, everything we've been taught. And that's when I realized that in our current education and practice systems, we understand very little about the human being. We understand the human being from the point of the biochemistry. We understand the matter, we understand the energy, we understand lactic acid कितना produce होता है और BMI कितना होना चाहिए और proteins क्या होते हैं. मतलब in fact the most that we understand about the mind, the nervous system, the brain, whatever you call it, is at best कि electrical throughput कितना होता है. That we understood. But we understood nothing about, we still don't actually understand anything about the motivations, our fears, our shadows, our insecurities, our passions, our desire, our joy, none of that. And that's really when I found my answer, when I went through a fair number of Indian scriptures, also realizing that this was an Atha Sagar. इसमें आप कितना भी deep जा सकते हो और मतलब आप अपने आप को completely खो सकते हो उसमें. But the nugget, वो कहते हैं ना, the motis that I picked up, मोती जो चुने मैंने, उसमें मुझे ये समझ में आया that our understanding in this side of the world of human behavior, human civilization, human social structures, human psychology, mind, feelings, emotions, everything is so strong that I think I've made it my life's purpose, and that's what we do at Eikam, to sort of nibble at the edges of what Western psychology understands, or Western physiology, or Western medicine understands, and just nibble on the edges to complete and expand our circle of knowledge, of information, of what we know about the world, and making sense of it. So that's what I do now. It took me a long time to articulate this. I always knew that this was always 15 saal se knew that I wanted to work in this field. But I think I struggled, as most of us who are on a spiritual quest struggle, to find the articulation for it. Matlab, the only two sort of paths that this went on to about aaj se 10-15 saal pehle was either that very left wing, soul searching, hocus pocus types, and that was a popular narrative, or the very right wing, very religion, faith, cult based, exotic alternative. Which is not what I wanted. So I think I struggled for a long time to find the articulation. And Kuch, I think it's a sign of the times that we are actually able to talk about this, that it's actually become mainstream. The other is, I think, the need of the hour. मतलब मुझे हमेशा लगता है that whenever we struggle for identity, whenever we struggle with issues of social structures or personal quests, we always go back to our roots. This has happened before in the 60s of flower power and the whole moral bankruptcy crisis, where people went and discovered Dhyan and Ashram and Ramana Maharishi. It's happened earlier about 30-40 years ago in the 80s, when there was a physiological crisis. All of us have grown up on Jane Fonda aerobics videos. But at that time, when nothing was working, junk food, fat diets, all of that, that's when the world went back and discovered yoga. It was tried and tested way of life, 5,000 years old. And it's our privilege and our fortune that we are living in these times today, where this is the narrative, where especially with the pandemic is actually catalyzed. ये जितना हम VUCA की बात कर रहे थे कि volatility है, uncertainty है, not being able to make sense of the world, and instinctively all of us are feeling it. The pandemic formalized it, catalyzed it, and that quest has become even deeper. So it was actually the organization is a pandemic recession baby, founded in 2020, and that's what we do now.
Just to interrupt you, Eika, I mean, so when you said we are all, I mean, so are we? What is your general hypothesis that during the pandemic, many of us started wondering what the hell we are doing in our lives, and started going deeper?
I think very good question, Ganesh, because I think 2-3 चीजें हुई हम लोग की. So at 3 levels. The first level was what was happening to us within our own selves. So we always have the concept of space and time. We hinge our identity and sense of existence in either the space and the context we exist in, the roles and responsibilities we have, the education we have, the positions we occupy, the offices we occupy. So either in space or in time. This is my me time, this is my office time, this is my gym time, this is food time, this is entertainment time, this is friends time. The pandemic collapsed both these identities. Hamari spaces limited ho gayi to the 4 walls we were living in. And that was your office, that was your home, that was your place where you met friends, whether you met them on screen, etc., etc. So your spaces collapsed and your times collapsed, because suddenly, and that is when we got most in the context of sexual harassment, we got a lot of complaints of domestic violence and abuse, because everybody was struggling to figure out, if I'm not going to office, who am I? If I don't have a fancy chair and a corner office and a 10 people member team जो रोज मुझे आके सलाम बजाते हैं, तो मैं कौन हूँ? The meeting with friends, etc. So that collapsed at the personal level. At the social level, the second thing that happened was that human engagement in a pre-pandemic world, we took human engagement for granted, and technology was at a premium. What the pandemic forced us on is technology तो commoditized हो गई, हम सब ने technology crack कर ली, we knew how to do all kinds of fancy stuff and it fulfilled us, but human engagement became at a premium. It's the first time in human history that you longed for human connect, human behavior, human touch. That hasn't happened even in wars. So that was the second thing that happened. And then at the third, at the organizational, so this is a structure we actually call me, mine, and mankind. And I will come back to this later about where it comes from. But at the organizational, tribes, communities, neighborhoods level, it polarized us. We became both disconnected from the world at large, and yet aware and desireful of our tribes and our communities. So we've all probably spoken more to our friends and relatives and cousins ever in the last 3 years than we've done ever before. This also therefore led to the questions, and that's why we talk about myth, modernity, and management, that the leadership questions have become different. So in the last 2-3 years, the questions from leaders, especially when they run organizations, are not about मैं अपने sales कैसे बढ़ाऊंगा या product क्या launch करूंगा. But suddenly all the rules that we have been taught, that we grew up with, whether it's our MBAs, whether it's our organizational interventions, whether it's trainings that happen, the management gurus that happen, we suddenly realize that none of those rules hold true. So that is what I mean by that the catalyst that the pandemic was, of a shifting time. And in fact, it's to me, it's slightly distressing that we already had this whole space of VUCA. So already we were pandering on fear. We were already pandering on volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. What we did, or what we could have done, we had the opportunity to catalyze it into simplicity and grace and gratitude and ease, instead of which in our industry and corporate existences, we've gotten even worse. So now we have VUCA replaced by Bunny, which has stuff like anxiety and nervousness, etc., which then leads you to believe that we thrive on fear. So, and that was my starting quest of saying that, yeah, how do you decode fear? What's beyond this fear? Of course, Mountain Dew will tell you that डर के आगे जीत है, but ये है क्या? कहाँ से आता है? क्यों आता है? Why do I feel the way I do? Why do I have fear in me? What are my insecurities and jealousies composed of? So that was part of the reason. And while that was my personal context, like I said, there was a much larger human civilizational context which is at play. And that's where I want to bring this to. So I remember we were having, so we conduct a lot of talks and lectures and have some very interesting conversation called the Banyan Insight Talks, where we actually discuss these themes. And we had this professor of Indian philosophy, and she was addressing us, and she said something very interesting. And this is, of course, 2017-18, so this much pre-pandemic. She said, so somebody asked her, Ki bhai, how is it that the Vedas were the first text, and then the Upanishads, and then the Puranas? And she said something fascinating. She said, okay, let me take you through the epochs of human civilization. She said, jo hamare texts hai, whether they be the Ved, the Purana, the Upanishads, whatever it is, they are actually outputs of the questions we ask. The questions we ask are a function of the times we live in. So she said, when human civilization first started forming, the first yuga was the Karma Kanda. It was the age of work. It was the age of organization. It was the age of figuring out how things happen, how fire happens, how wheels happen, how societies must get structured, what should our existence be, etc., etc. And it's called the Karma Kanda. And therefore, the output of this Karma Kanda was SOP manuals. Whether so, if you look at the Vedas, if you read the 4 Vedas, they're basically SOP manuals of what must be done. They don't have any deep philosophy in them, by the way. So they basically are lists of how a ritual must be conducted, how music is to be made, how a house is to be done, how a marriage is to be performed, how families must live together, etc., etc. What must a daily life in your day in your life look like, etc. So that was your Karma Kanda. Once the Karma Kanda, the Karma Yuga, and we sort of understood what must be done, That's when work and task and processes became muscle memory. That's when we started getting curious. That's when the intellect came in. So that's when you started asking the deep questions of why do we exist? What is our meaning of life? Why do I feel the way I do? Why must I surrender to the divine, etc. So that the intellectual inquiry started happening. And therefore the Karma Kanda was followed by the Jnana Yuga. The Jnana Yuga, therefore, the output of the Jnana Yuga, because the questions we were asking were deep meaning, philosophy, engagement, the why questions. The output of the Jnana Yuga was your philosophy text. So your Upanishads, your Aranyakas, your Vedanta, your commentary texts, which were all of your deep philosophy texts. Honestly, this is also in very many ways how we live our personal lives as well, right? The first 20, 25 years are just about figuring out about what to do. Then after that, you start getting curious and questions start emerging, followed by the third yuga. So now we are at about 2000 plus minus 500 odd years ago. And now it's the age where organized religion is emerging. All organized religions have emerged 2000 plus minus 500 years ago. So while we had found, or we were in the quest of, or almost done with the intellectual curiosity aspect of it, about 2000-2500 saal pehle, because organized religion came in, the questions we started asking were about popularity and recruitment. So every faith, every organized sect was then recruiting. And so therefore, our narrative became about the popularity, the recruitment, who told their stories better, which is how the output, and this was called the Bhakti Yuga, the age of stories, of surrender, of affiliations, of alignments, of organizing ourselves in faith. And therefore, the output of the Bhakti Yuga was all your story text. And this is across, but this is not specific to a religion or another. All your organized faith, this is the time that your story literature emerges. So your Puranas, your Itihasa, your Ramayana, Mahabharata, all of these were about who told their story the best. So, and she was explaining this to us about how we transitioned from the Karma Kanda, the Karma Yuga, to the Nyaya Yuga, to the Bhakti Yuga. And she said, but that's not the point. The point is what is emerging next. And remember, this conversation is happening pre-pandemic. So the question was, she said, look, we're all instinctively feeling this thing, ek shift ho raha hai. So this whole term of VUCA, the industry, we're realizing there's a shift, but we don't understand what that shift is. So she said, the big question is, what is this shift? And then she, and then of course, I've gone back and sort of empirically validated this. She said every text, whether it's the Veda, whether it's the Upanishads, whether it's your Brahma Vaivartya Puran, whether it's your Bhagavatam, whether it's Devi Puran, doesn't matter what the text is. Almost every text in its own manner talks about the transition that happens from the Bhakti Yuga to the next Yuga that's emerging, which is called the Nyaya Yuga. The Nyaya Yuga, so what we are stepping into, the transition that we've been seeing, the uncertainty that we've been feeling over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and is now, like I said, gotten catalyzed by the pandemic, is the transition from the Bhakti to the Nyaya Yuga. Now, the Nyaya Yuga, as it has been described in the texts, is the Yuga of justice. Literally, Nyaya is justice. But justice from the point of view of individual human rights and liberty. It's that age where Nyaya is not a social framework, but a personal framework. It's that stage where, and for all of us who have children who are adulting, we will see this very often, where there's this whole sense of, yeah, you've told me itna social structure hai, aise hona chahiye, aur yahi sahi hai, aur yahi galat hai. But so what? What does it do for me? What's my place? Who am I? So that is that quest that is emerging into the Nyaya Yuga. Now, while this made sense from the from the scriptural perspective, from the Aitihasik perspective, the question was, so what? How does it help me solve my daily problems? And that's when I realized, when leaders were talking to me, organizational leaders, by the way, it's not just in India, but globally, the most frequent question that we now get from large promoters, from business holders, business owners, from corporate leadership is saying, what's going to happen? What's the sense of shifting sands? What's the new normal that'll emerge? And that's when I realized, when I was studying the corporate world and the world of industry, that these are exactly the four phases we've had in our world of industry. So when we first understood organized corporate world, it was the world of industry, where the entire conversation was on productivity, output, scale, factories, assembly lines. The human conversation at the workplace was about, again, productivity, about log in and log out hours, about time clocks, where the bonuses were also linked to productivity. You produce more, you get more bonus, right? This was the age of industry. Slowly, as we understood that, and therefore the most important CXO was probably the COO, the operations, chief operations officer. From there, we transitioned into the age of information. The age of information, which is Jnana Yuga, literally. So Karma Kanda moved to Jnana Yuga, which was your age of information, where what was at a premium, where the corporate conversation became about how well you organized the world and the information around you. So that's when tech became important, because tech was your biggest tool to organize information. That's why suddenly you had the Googles of the world emerging. And Google ka literal tagline is, we organize the world for you. So Google became important, information became important, organizing information became important. The whole idea of big data, trends, patterns became important. In places where you were dealing with individuals, KYC became important. Right? So this whole idea of who your customer is, what do they do, and seeing them as a spot of data. Right? And therefore, including predictive analytics. So that was also the beginning of AI, if not its expression. This was also the time where the human conversation also became about how much of information can you organize. Suddenly, the data analytics analysts were in demand, etc. Right? So this was the age of information, the Jnana Yuga. From the Jnana Yuga, we transitioned to the Bhakti Yuga in human civilization. And the same thing in the corporate world, where we transition from the age of industry, to the age of information, to the age of the idea, right? The Bhakti Yuga. This is the economy that we've now been living in. The economy of valuations, the economy of multiples, the economy of leverage, the economy of ESOPs. This is the Yuga where it's the power of an idea that's more important. Our financial metrics have shifted from P&Ls and cash flows and DCF to valuations and multipliers and what is a TAM, what is the total addressable market, etc., etc. And that's the shift we are seeing in the age of the information, of the idea. The human conversation. The human conversation is no longer about bonus or productivity or output, but the conversation is how powerful is your idea. The conversation is on ESOPs. The conversation is about how well can you sell your idea? What's the leverage that you can get on it? And we are currently in the ideas economy. Honestly, companies that haven't made that transition from industry to information to the idea have actually collapsed. You've seen giants like Xerox, and we've seen giants like Nokia that didn't. So Nokia was a product of information age and didn't make the transition into the age of the idea. Xerox was a product of the age of the industry and didn't make that transition. And if you look at just the auto industry, and it's so powerful, right? That famous quote from Mr. Ford, where he says, you can have any color as long as it's black. Classically industry. To the age of information, where you spoke about data kya hai uska, matlab mileage kitna hai, performance kya hai, features kya hai. This was the age of Volvo. Safety is more important, and you were comparing data and analytics. That's your classically age of information. To the age of the idea, where I recently saw this ad from Fiat, which says you can, and the ad actually plays on, you can have any color in your car as long as it's not black. And they've launched a huge campaign around it. So that's the power of the idea. Tesla running vehicles on batteries is the power of the idea, right? Now, the question is that if we are transitioning, if the human epoch, and if history tells us that we transition from bhakti into Nyaya Yoga, what's next? And I think that's what's been, nibbling at us, gnawing at us, and that's what we're trying to figure out. And I again go back to my scriptures for the answer, to say that if we transition from the bhakti, from the karma to the jnana, to the bhakti, to the nyaya, then logically, in our corporate workplaces, we should be transitioning from the age of information, from industry to information to idea, and now the age of the individual. And therefore, the whole conversation around what is the age of the individual. Therefore, what the corporate conversation is around, what is our business metric around, what are our financials around, what does this mean for leadership, is the space that we are working in right now. And that's why I go back to the beginning of why I am very deeply invested in this, is because this, now more than ever, understanding the human for who they are has become even more important. Frankly, even if you see the big money chasing, so if you look at where the big money is right now and what it's chasing, every one of the 10 largest Silicon Valley investors is also investing today in what's called human tech. Unfortunately, what we understand about human tech is very limited. What we understand about human tech is तुम्हें device पहना दिया जो तुम्हारा heartbeat और pulse rate measure कर लेगा, at best blood pressure और sugar भी कर लेगा. So like I said, our understanding of the human is limited to the biochemistry. The question is, therefore, can we, with our wisdom, contribute to expanding the understanding of the human themselves? And that's a place where we've been doing some amount of work on decoding the human, individual unboxed. There are some frameworks that we work with, and most of them are derived from the Bhagavad Gita and the Kathopanishad, on what drives us, what motivates us, where do fears originate from. And while we do that in our personal context, there needs to be a framework which is universal. That framework, by the way, that we're working on just now in the context of the individual is actually derived from the concept of the karma, the dharma, and the bhav. So we are saying if you have to understand an individual, and it's an exercise I'd like to actually leave you behind with. I will share what we are doing, but I would like to leave behind with you this thought or this exercise of saying कि अगर हमें एक individual को समझना है, is there a framework for it? For instance, when we go to study medicine in your first year, you're only studying human systems, anatomy 101. If you're studying marketing, in the first paper, you're only studying the marketing structures and systems. In finance, you're only understanding the P&L, the balance sheet, and the cash flows, right? If the individual is at the front and the center of all our existence, the individual is no longer just an employee. So what it means for the corporate world also is that the business of people has become too important to be left to the CSR. What it also therefore means is that this individual is not only your employee, but is your leader, is your stakeholder, is your investor, is your consumer. So what that means is that we need to, and therefore you can see in the larger corporations, whether it's Unilever or Procter & Gamble or the big ones, who are actually seeing around the corner that the conversation has moved from scale and productivity to key data, trends, and analytics, to how can I introduce something innovative, to actually purpose and meaning and engagement. This is why you have the challenge, and this is one of the biggest challenges that we have in when we deal with business leaders, is where the organization is saying कि यार these bloody millennials, they don't work at all. इनको मतलब हम पैसा दे रहे हैं, हम career दे रहे हैं, हम नौकरी दे रहे हैं, and they don't want to come to work. They want, they're not engaged. Work ethic नहीं है. Whereas if you actually talk to that millennial 26, 27, 28-year-old, so they're coming, that the corporate organization is coming from the age of the industry, not even information or idea. Whereas that 26-year-old is saying, I don't want your money. I don't want your promotions. I don't want to be CEO. I want to work 4 days. I want my 3 days to myself. I want to go out traveling. And therefore, that's your classic conflict of the age of the individual talking to the age of industry. Right? And those are real problems that are coming up.
No, but Eika, I must interrupt you on this. I remember speaking in a conference in Monte Carlo a long time back. I think it was 8-9 years back. And there was a speaker called Professor Johansson from Stockholm University. And he was saying that, very interesting. He has written a book called Bowling Alone. He says, why do 92% of people in the Nordics prefer to go to a bowling alley by themselves and not with friends? So, that was the subject of his talk. And my worry is post-COVID, exactly what you said, the 26-year-old millennial who says, just leave me alone, I want me time, etc., etc. So are we going to reach a situation where everybody is in it for himself, and the concept of society, the concept of the Rotary Club, where all of us meet on Wednesday morning, will just become extinct?
Or actually even more meaningful, because the desire to belong to the Rotary may or may not be linked to social engagement. What I mean by social engagement is that it's cool to belong to the Rotary. I must do something that is of a social cause or purpose. It's nice to be done that. I get pat on the back. And from those reasons to actual reasons of I want to belong to the Rotary because I want to do good for the world. I want to belong to the Rotary because I actually like these people that I engage with. I want to, and therefore, in my worldview, the age of the individual will take away the fence sitters. And we've seen that happen during COVID, where the quest will truly be about who I am, what I want, versus the narrative of क्या सही है, क्या होना चाहिए, what makes me look cool, क्या मुझे करना चाहिए, which is how I grew up, no? Which is how all of us grew up. It's cool to be a banker, बच्चे होने चाहिए, शादी होनी चाहिए, नौकरी अच्छी होनी चाहिए, बैंकिंग की नौकरी अच्छी है, बेटा तुम इंजीनियर या डॉक्टर बन जाओ. Those are all societal narratives we lived with. Versus that shift of saying what I truly want. And in my worldview, the way I see it is that I think it will actually take away mediocrity. It will take away fears and insecurities because I'm not doing anything to please you at all. By whether you're my parent or my society, you're my grandparent or you're my boss.
But you don't think it'll create a completely insular world where everybody is out for himself or looking at their mobile phone and not interested in engaging in society?
I may not engage in society, and that's how it's coming to the framework that we're talking about. I may not engage in society, but I will love because I truly love, not because I must. Because human emotion is not to be is not to be dismissed. And that's why the framework that we have where we study people on is actually a karma and a dharma framework. Right? So the karma framework is, and I'm not getting into the theory of karma and action and consequences, but karma literally in terms of what my actions are. Where do I engage my energy on? And this again comes from Swami Chinmayan and then the Bhagavad Gita, where we have 3 bodies of karma, which is our body, physical body, what we do, our mind, our emotional body, what we feel, and the intellectual body, the viveka or a buddhi or the judgment, which is what I think. So my energy transaction happens not only when I actually perform an action, but also when I feel. So anything that sends off that electrical blip that we monitor in the EEG. So what I do, what I think, what I feel, these are my karma body, but the body, mind, and intellect. And then my spheres of existence, which are actually derived from dharma. So in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about dharma existing at 3 levels. And dharma not as religion, not as faith, but dharma literally translated as dhar, hold, ma, Atma. So what I hold, what I uphold. And dharma ke 3 spheres hain. The first sphere of dharma is swadharma, what I owe to my own self, my duty, my relationship with my own self. The second one is aparadharma. Aparadharma is what I owe by virtue of the space and time I'm born in. So kshetra, jati, kala, samay, vishay, vastu, vyakti, etc. What I owe by virtue of my context, space, time. And then at the third level is paradharma. What I owe to the preservation of the laws of the universe, to my relationship with the environment and the world at large. This is what we've decoded into saying this is about 3 levels of relationship. My relationship with me, with mine. So mine is my family, my friends, my team, my peers, my senior subordinates, and mankind, which is my relationship with my industry and my organization at work, and with my tribes, my communities and neighborhoods in my at home. And therefore, Ganesh, when you sort of triangulate people and figure out कि तुम्हारे body में in relation to yourself क्या हो रहा है. So for instance, if I'm a person full of fear, in my body, in my relation, so there are 9 superpositions, right? 3 by 3. Every one of them will have their expression. So if I'm operating from fear, that fear in my body will actually express as disease eventually. That fear in my relationship with my closest ones, with mine, will actually, in the body, will reflect as this, as a person who's unable to take a stand. And this same fear in my relationship and even in my body language, my behaviors, my engagement with the larger world will actually express itself as being a victim. I'm always complaining, cribbing, crying, blaming somebody else for it. Right? The same thing happens in what's happening with my emotion and my thoughts. Right? And this is how from here begins the next level of the journey of the individual, which is what is the mind state I'm operating from. Emotions have become important. We understand the body, we understand biology and chemistry. We perhaps understand the intellect, right? In our study and medical systems and academic systems, we understand the intellect. Howard Gardner, multiple intelligences, spatial hai, intellectual, number-driven hai, etc., etc. It's this space of the mind, the emotions, that we don't understand at all. We have no vocabulary for. The best we have for it is neuroscience, which also, by the way, recognizes 5 negative emotions and 3 positive. Right? So this space of understanding our emotions, which is, I was saying, Anish, it will become even more important because emotions will become important. This whole generation that we as adults call woke is actually far more evolved than we think they are. मतलब हम, like I said, as the corporate house or as the leader or as the parent, हम operate कर रहे हैं वैसे कि ऐसा ही होना चाहिए. यार तुम लोग सुनते नहीं हो, काम नहीं करते हो. But that generation is saying मुझे नहीं करना है. I am very clear कि I get my joy from studying physics. MBA may be an easier route to success, but I want to study physics. I just want to study physics for the sake of studying physics. I am struggling with it. We are 2 corporate parents, but as corporate as it gets. And thank God I've made this journey. I'm so grateful for my journey now because I can deal with the daughters better. But there's one who wants to be a physicist and wants to study GR. जिसमें खुद कह रही है कि इसमें ना कोई application नहीं है. And I'm cringing within कि मतलब bye. And I have another one who wants to be a filmmaker, of which I understand nothing at all. So I don't even know where she gets the desire from. But it helps me make sense of the world better. Understanding, decoding the age of the individual. And that's what we're spending most of our life right now on. And in that age of the individual, the biggest blank is understanding in the karma space, understanding the mind and the emotions. That's what we're working on. We're working on the Navarasa around it. We have 3 levels of emotional expression that we've worked on, including their drivers. And in the Dharma, the space that's least understood again is the relationship space, the mind space. हम mankind या paradharma पे sorted हैं. समझ में आता है at least, even if we don't do anything about it. We understand the me aspect of it. We understand, relationship with self. Where we are most conflicted is in the relationship with our nearest and dearest ones. We are angriest with those that are closest to us. So the 2 spaces that our current work of field of work on and We are actually working with almost 2,000, 2,300 odd researchers across the world. मतलब आप हम कह रहे हैं आप योगी हैं, वैद्य हैं, साइंटिस्ट हैं, हीलर हैं, जो हैं, come talk to us. Let's create this huge Atha Sagar, the data lake, जिसमें we can all contribute and then pull out our own Gangajis from there.
Okay, Eika, that is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to stop you here and get some questions from the audience.
Yes.
Umeshji, back to you. Maybe you can conduct the Q&A.
Yeah. Anybody, any question?
Mridula, you had a question, no?
Yes. Hello. Fascinating. I joined a bit late, so I'm going to go through the entire recording, but it was fascinating the last few minutes that I heard. Thank you so much. Eika, right? That's how I pronounce your name.
Eika.
Eika.
तो मैंने बताया नहीं मृदुला जी, एक सेकंड. So Eika is actually Durga जी का पहला नाम.
Beautiful.
Shakti at the time of conception is called Eika.
Eika, how beautiful. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I love the fact that you talked about body, mind, spirit alignment. And also you talked about the newer generation has their own mind. I completely agree with you on they have their own mind, they have their own choices. But how self-aware they are, because there is tremendous amount, that's my question, how truly self-aware they are, because there is tremendous amount of social media influence and they take a liking to one, Gary V or one influencer, and then their life revolves around that till they start to fail in something, right? Till it stops making sense, until they, so the information that they are sort of receiving, do you think that's kind of making them weaker? And the thing is that they are sort of disconnected with society in general, not disconnected, but they are much more aware of what they want and they want to go for it, but not listen and absorb information from outside as much as we talk about, the parents, they'll say, oh, you are previous generation, whatever you went through, it's not relevant to us anymore. And they are trying to make sense of the world themselves, which is great. But in that, how do they actually know that they are pulling information or being influenced from the right sources and they are able to take a more balanced perspective of life? Because also what I've seen is with younger generation, much more higher levels of anxiety, depression, what you talked about, relationship challenges, and their ability to cope with that is far lower. So they get very, very pleased when something nice happens and it's on the one polarization. And when something doesn't happen, even smaller bit, they'll completely go down. And that's when the mom, the mentor, the coach is remembered. So what do you think about that and how can we strengthen that? And I feel like truly, you said they're self-aware, but I feel like that self-awareness is only limited to the want, but not really the inward journey that we talk about.
Correct. And you're so right, Mridula ji, because sometimes I feel जब हम बच्चे थे, the coaching that came to us or the nurture or the learning that came to us was much simpler, because in order for me to come first, I only needed to do better than you. Right? So it was just a question of, and that was simple. Because it was the age of information, it was also a function of who had more information, who had greater access to the library. I needed to just know more than you and I would come first, which is also what my organizational, my societal narrative was. Our parents, when we were growing up, never had this thought ki apne liye socho. Never had this thought ki tum kya karna chahte ho. It was always, beta, ye sahi hai, ye acceptable hai, ye respectable hai, aur ye success ka formula hai, go ahead and do it. The risk with, so while the age of the individual sounds beautiful and very it sounds like a very utopian world when you say that you can be whatever you want, you can do whatever you want, you only have to focus about you. The flip side of that is that it places the responsibility only on me. I suddenly have no excuses. Like हमारे generation, we had enough excuses. मेरे माँ बाप ने doctor बना दिया मुझे तो I wanted to go pursue music, but my parents said become a doctor. Or marriages, it's convenient to say कि भाई आपने शादी कराई थी अब आप देख लो कैसे हो सकता है, etc. etc. We had a world to genuinely blame. Now
shared victories and shared losses. Now it's all my risk and my gain.
It's not my fault. The tougher job that the next generation has is therefore, like you rightly said, It isn't about access to information as much as what you do with that information. And information is commoditized like technology. Like you said, you're thrown, everything is thrown at you. So what has now become more important is focusing on the judgment, the analysis, the discretion that the child needs to apply, which then becomes for us as parents, as leaders, the challenge of, in our upbringing, the challenge of helping them or equipping them with a toolkit that helps them make the right decision. So you're absolutely right that their world is a far more complex world.
Yes.
It's an easily accessible, complex, and a deeply personal world. जिसमें हर चीज मेरे फोन पे आती है मुझे. I actually don't need to meet a single person to fulfill any aspect of my existence. And that's a scary space. Therefore, what's happening
and yet
here,
I feel unfulfilled, right? Yet they feel unfulfilled.
Because if I'm not equipped for it, then I don't, everything's happening here. The universe is mental, right? The principle of mentalism is there. So the universe is mental, everything is happening here, which means how my processors of the mind are built are what decide what my engagement with the world is. So for instance, and in my household, one of the things that we've tried to do is you can come to me with an opinion, good on you. But unless you're able to give me the other side of that opinion, we have no conversation. Right? So those little kind of toolkits that we introduce to make sure that wo jo muscle memory hai, aapke processors hain, wo train ho rahe. So I'll take a 2-minute detour to actually explain. And again, this comes from the Upanishads, this whole idea of how the mind works. So just like in a computer, तो हमारे 3 layers हैं, conscious mind है, subconscious mind है और unconscious mind है. जो conscious mind है, that is my senses, that's my manas, that's how I engage with the world. Like in a computer, that's the RAM, which collects data from the world, what I hear, think, see, touch, taste, etc., etc. And exactly like a computer, जैसे computer को आप बंद करते हैं या उसे refresh करते हैं, बंद करके, you put it to sleep so that it clears out. Exactly like that, the mind clears out the RAM, all the data that you've brought in from the world outside. Then there's the subconscious, which is like the CPU of the computer, which actually processes this data into strands of information. Now, the principle on which the CPU processes data is aapne usme kya programming feed kari hai. Exactly like that, the mind processes this data into information on the basis of 3 processors that we have. The first is our memory, chitta. The second is our judgment and analysis, which is vivek and buddhi. And the third is the aham, or the ego. That these 3 processors, जैसे आपने गाना सुना, उस गाने को सुना आपने, so that's your manas, that's hearing the song. How you're processing that song is a function of your memory of that song. College में कौन सी girlfriend से, who had you dedicated that song to in the college fair? That's a memory, and that's what evokes emotion. Or you remember that, I remember listening to the song, while I liked the lyrics, but the music was really bad. It was an Anu Malik voice. But the music was, the song, the lyrics are not bad because they're Gulzar lyrics, etc. That's your discretion, your vivek or buddhi processing that song. But the third one is your aham, which in that song, you listen to that song and say, you know what, I could write that song better. There's no judgment in that. That's aham, that's ego. That's how I'm processing that song right now. Now, what we need to, because this processing or our processors or the subconscious mind that makes sense of the world is how we view the world. So therefore, Mridula ji, it's become even more critical, or our role as parents is not to provide them guidance, is not to show them the path. They have enough things that are shown to them. For us, I think as parents and leaders, the only thing that we need to equip them with, be sensitive to, be aware of, helicopter them around, is actually the sense of tum kaise soch rahe ho, how are you thinking, how are you processing, how will you view the world and make sense of it. Right.
Ika,
And
Ika, Ika, आपके साथ एक दिन का ज्ञान सेशन करना पड़ेगा.
oh, I'm very happy to come down to Pune. I
Yes,
like
I've
Pune.
already written how to connect with you so that we can take this conversation
Back to you, Umesh ji. You'll never interrupt these women.
Yeah. So that was a wonderful discussion about the human hardware and software, both. And you have differentiated between the two very well, that what should be our approach for the handling the new generations. Thank you for thought-provoking discussions on the subject. I would now request Vardhamanji, are you there?
Yes, I am there.
Would you come with your 4-liners?
बिल्कुल.
8-liner.
8-liner. Okay. एका जी धन्यवाद. बहुत बेहतरीन सेशन हुआ और गणेश जी ने राइट ही बताया कि एक दिन का सत्र करना पड़ेगा, ज्ञान सत्र, तब जाकर बात पूरी होगी. रोटरी की परंपरा रही है कि सेशन के अंत में 4 लाइनें कविता कहे या 4 लाइनें कही जाती है और वो जिम्मेदारी मुझ पर होती है, वो निभाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूं. मिथ होगा, मिथ्या नहीं है. मिथ होगा, मिथ्या नहीं है. पुराणिक होगा, महज अतीत नहीं है. आधुनिक को भी देखना ही होगा. आधुनिक को भी देखना ही होगा. और यहाँ एका का मतलब मैंने निकाला था अपनी तरफ से. आपने अभी उस पर उजाला डाला, प्रकाश डाला. मैंने कहा ईका कहे डंके की चोट पर और तलवार की नोक पर. ईका कहे डंके की चोट पर और तलवार की नोक पर, कविता के भाव में. मैंने ऐसा सुना है कि कवि एका का अर्थ एक कविता के रूप में भी होता है. मे बी आप उसको दुरुस्त करेंगे अगर गलत फरमाया तो. एका कहे डंके की चोट पर और तलवार की नोक पर, कविता के भाव में इतिहास से सीखना है, विरासत को भूल जाना नहीं है, पर आज से जोड़ना है. धन्यवाद एका. धन्यवाद.
Vardhamanji, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much.
माय प्लेजर. आज जो सुना, जो मिला, मैं दरखास्त करूंगा आपसे, अभी कर लेता हूं और गणेश जी से फिर से, कि आपको एक दिन के लिए पूना खींच लाए और दिन भर बिताए तो कहीं जाकर मन भर जाएगा तभी.
नहीं, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Want to come to Pune, Ganesh?
Ganesh, it's your job.
Good morning. बहुत ही सुंदर वर्धमान जी.
Thank you.
Eikaji, do you have any books or workshops on topics that you spoke today, which you organize or publish, so that we can engage and educate more ourselves?
Vijay ji, इस साल I have 2 books that are coming out.
Okay.
इस साल का जितना है वो आई थिंक आपको सोशल मीडिया पे मिल जाएगा. लिंक्डइन पे कुछ पोस्ट्स हैं, कुछ फेसबुक पे हैं, कुछ इंस्टाग्राम पे हैं. इस साल के लिए तो वहां पर है. किताब लिखने में बहुत टाइम लगता है, उसमें बहुत मेहनत जाती है. तो आई थिंक, और मैं गणेश से बहुत सालों से कह रही हूँ कि प्लीज मेरी हेल्प कर दीजिए, किताब लिखवा लीजिए मेरे साथ. वो नहीं लिखवा रहे, सो दिस इज ऑल्सो ऑन हिम. But I think there'll be books soon. But for now, most of what I talk is available on social media. We've actually been running a series this entire year called Me, Mine and Mankind, जिसमें हम ये छोटे छोटे लिटरली 1.5 मिनट के वीडियोस हैं जिसमें हम छोटा छोटा ये बताते हैं. I think sometime later this year I'll also do a longer talk in a session on that there. But अभी it's out there on social media. एका बैनर्जी के हैंडल पर है, एकम के हैंडल पर है. एकम is EIKAM. It's there on Facebook, it's there on Instagram, it's there on LinkedIn for now till the book comes out.
You come out with the books, we'll sell them very well.
I promise.
Okay,
Thank you.
I now request Ipshita to propose a vote of thanks to our guest speaker.
Ipsa दौड़ रही है.
Yeah, I'm majorly focusing on my fitness, so sorry if I'm outside. But Eika, thank you so much for the enlightening talk today, and I think it's very relevant today in our world, because in any organization you have so many generations working together, and the cultural, the moral, the social values, okay, are so diverse nowadays. And I think there is a lot of conflict within organizations between the different generations and how to handle each other. And also, I think people today especially youngsters today have a very complicated relationship with their own selves. And you have concepts like non-binary and things like that, which have come up, and which weren't there. People didn't have that kind of confusions earlier. So something like what you have suggested, which acts like an anchor to, or acts like a framework in which to make sense of the world today, and the relations between people, the relations between different generations and with self. I think it's fantastic. And thank you so much for enlightening us today. And I'm also looking forward to your book as and when it comes out. And I'll definitely check out your social media profile. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me over.